America is starting to crack in the most ordinary place imaginable, around the dinner table. By 2025, the cost of food hasn't just risen, it has surged by roughly 27%, while paychecks barely moved, inching up only about 4%. Families are now shelling out more than $1,200 every month just to put meals together, and even then, many are ending their days still feeling hungry. Credit limits are exhausted, savings accounts have been drained, and with every swipe at the checkout line, a little more personal dignity slips away. Across the country, parents quietly skip meals so their children don't have to. At work, employees act like everything's fine, hiding their hunger during lunch breaks as if it's something to be ashamed of. This goes far beyond inflation. It's a slow-motion collapse that's been dressed up to look like everyday life. The Great Depression is no longer just a chapter in a history book. It has crept back into reality, embedding itself within the middle class, surviving quietly behind a thin disguise of endurance. Number 5. Washington. In Washington state, the grocery store has quietly turned into ground zero for economic stress. This is the same place that launched Amazon's trillion-dollar dominance and normalized $6 coffee. Yet beneath that glossy success lies an uncomfortable reality. The middle class here is struggling just to eat well. Once celebrated as a hub of innovation and upward mobility, Washington is now replaying a modern, nearly invisible version of the Great Depression. One where hunger is hidden behind credit cards and the constant chirp of self-checkout machines. Families who used to shop without hesitation now pause in every aisle, running mental calculations, debating whether buying milk today means skipping breakfast tomorrow. Back in 2019, the typical household spent around $700 a month on groceries. By 2025, that figure has climbed past $1,200 for a family of four, an increase of nearly 70% in only 6 years. Eggs approach $5 a carton. Bread averages over $4. Chicken, once under $2 a pound, now regularly sells for $4.50 or more. Getting food isn't just expensive, it's costly to reach. Gas prices in and around Seattle often exceed $5 a gallon, turning even a grocery run into a budget decision. And while expenses soar, paychecks haven't followed. A median household income of $94,000 sounds comfortable on paper, but once taxes, $2,500 rent, $400 in utilities, car insurance, and child-related costs are deducted, many families are left with barely $100 to cover an entire week of food. Parents who once packed lunches with fruit, snacks, and variety now stretch bulk instant noodles as far as possible. In eastern Washington, food banks report a 40% increase in visitors compared to pre-pandemic levels, and many of those standing in line work full-time. A Boeing technician earning $35 an hour now waits beside a teacher and a nurse, all three living on the edge of hunger in one of the wealthiest states in the country. These aren't people who avoided responsibility. They're the ones who used to represent stability, taxpayers, overtime workers, dependable contributors, yet a balanced diet is now out of reach. The cruelest irony is that grocery stores remain fully stocked. Organic produce, premium seafood, and imported goods gleam under fluorescent lights while employees quietly skip lunch in break rooms nearby. The food exists, it's just unaffordable. Inflation has quietly reshaped the middle class into something invisible. People who appear fine, wear clean clothes, and swipe credit cards for ground beef. Carrying grocery debt is becoming routine. Surveys now show that 1 in 3 Washington households uses credit cards to pay for basic food, accumulating nearly $90 a month in interest alone. That isn't living. It's surviving from one balance to the next. Even the state's wealthy tech corridors aren't spared. In Redmond and Bellevue, six-figure earners split meals, reduce portions, or avoid restaurants entirely. A simple family dinner out now costs between $80 and $100, more than what some households can afford for a full week of groceries. At the same time, property taxes, healthcare premiums, and daycare costs have stripped away nearly all disposable income. When wages rise 4% but food prices jump 20%, progress disappears. You just decline more slowly. The middle class here doesn't starve in public view. They starve quietly. They buy less meat, dilute milk, and swap fresh produce for cheaper processed substitutes. Parents take smaller servings so their children don't notice the shortage. People who once valued independence now find themselves asking the same question their grandparents whispered in the 1930s. How did things fall apart this fast? Beneath billion-dollar skylines and delivery trucks filled with food, Washington's middle class is fighting to preserve dignity in the face of hunger. They don't need pity. They need the truth acknowledged. Because when the people who build the state, educate its children, and staff its hospitals can no longer afford to eat properly, this isn't inflation. It's the quiet return of the Great Depression, rebranded, shrink-wrapped in modern life, illuminated by fluorescent lights, and paid for one grocery receipt at a time. Number 4. Mississippi. Mississippi has long been known as the poorest state in the country, but in 2025, that label carries a far more unsettling reality. The middle class here isn't just struggling, it's going hungry. This isn't the kind of hunger people recognize from history books or black and white photos of soup lines. It's quieter than that. It shows up in constant compromise, endless calculations, and exhaustion that never seems to lift. Across the state, teachers, factory employees, and nurses stand at checkout counters counting dollars instead of items, realizing a single week of groceries can cost more than 2 full days of wages. What makes this especially devastating is who these people are. They aren't unemployed. They aren't relying on government assistance. They're full-time workers who start their days before sunrise, push through 10-hour shifts, and still return home to half-empty refrigerators. The average household income in Mississippi hovers around $54,000 a year, but that number no longer reflects reality. Living costs have surged at a pace families simply can't match. Groceries that once ran about $600 a month before the pandemic now exceed $1,000, consuming nearly a quarter of take-home pay. Eggs that sold for $1.29 now approach $4.80. Milk has climbed past $6 a gallon. Ground beef, once a budget staple, can reach $6.50 per pound. For households with 2 or 3 children, the math collapses entirely. A mother in Jackson earning $22 an hour recently told local reporters she spends close to $250 every single week just to feed her family of 4. And that's without eating out or buying anything extra. No treats, no convenience foods, just basics like rice, bread, vegetables, and milk. Mississippi's middle class is being erased, squeezed between stagnant wages and runaway inflation. The long-standing myth of Southern affordability has completely fallen apart. Rent in cities like Gulfport and Hattiesburg has jumped nearly 38% since 2020. Utility bills have doubled. Once rent, fuel, and childcare are paid, most families are left with only a few $100s, and grocery bills now burn through that in a matter of days. As a result, many households are leaning on credit cards simply to eat, creating what economists describe as hunger debt, a brutal cycle where families borrow just to survive. Food banks are overwhelmed. Before 2020, they primarily served the unemployed or extremely low-income residents. Now, 1 out of every 4 visitors has a full-time job. Teachers arrive after class lets out. Warehouse workers show up before dawn. Nurses stop in after long overnight shifts. Pride has been stripped away. What remains is survival. Even the cheapest foods are starting to feel out of reach. Families replace chicken with beans, fresh milk with powdered substitutes, and produce with canned goods designed to last longer, not nourish better. Healthy eating has become a luxury, something reserved for people with money. The bitter irony is impossible to ignore. Mississippi produces enormous amounts of food. Its farmland supplies corn, soybeans, and poultry to millions of Americans. Yet many of the people living closest to those fields can't afford the food they help create. Corporate consolidation has wiped out small local markets, while profits are funneled out of state. Residents pay national chain prices for goods grown in their own backyard. It's like raising your own dinner, only to be forced to buy it back at double the cost. What's happening here goes beyond financial strain. It's a moral failure. People who followed the rules, worked hard, saved where they could, and did everything right, are now forced to choose between groceries and gas, between paying bills and eating breakfast. In a state where nearly 60% of residents identify as middle or working class, hunger is no longer an abstract statistic. It's shared, personal, and constant. Perhaps the most unsettling part is how silent it all is. There are no riots, no mass protests, No screaming headlines, just millions of small sacrifices happening behind closed doors. Parents skipping meals so their children can eat. Elderly couples shrinking portions to stretch checks. Workers pretending they aren't hungry during lunch breaks. Mississippi isn't merely struggling, it's starving slowly. And with food prices expected to rise another 10% this year, it's becoming painfully obvious this isn't a short-term emergency. It's a modern echo of the Great Depression unfolding quietly across the state, one empty plate at a time. Number 3. Nevada. Nevada has always sold a fantasy. Neon lights slice through the desert night, casinos shimmer nonstop, and billion-dollar resorts promise endless indulgence. But beneath the glow, there's a reality most visitors never see. The middle class here is struggling to afford food. For decades, Las Vegas stood as a symbol of possibility. Service jobs were steady, living costs were manageable, and tips often made the difference between scraping by and getting ahead. Now, the lights still shine, but they cast long shadows over a growing hunger crisis. The servers handling high-roller bets, the housekeepers cleaning luxury suites, the grocery clerks scanning overpriced essentials. They're the ones skipping meals, stretching leftovers, and counting down to the next paycheck. By 2025, Nevada's middle class is facing a collapse that rarely makes headlines. The median household income sits near $67,000 a year, but that number has lost its meaning. Food prices have risen more than 30% faster than wages, erasing any sense of progress. Federal data shows that the average grocery bill in Las Vegas jumped from about $700 a month in 2020 to nearly $1,150 in 2025. Basic staples now feel expensive. Eggs cost around $5.50 a dozen. Milk averages more than $6.30 a gallon. Even rice and beans, once the cheapest fallback foods, have doubled in price. A mother in Henderson summed it up simply: "I used to feed my family on $150 a week. Now it's over $300, and we're eating less." The casino-driven economy that once lifted Nevada's workers has become a liability. Employees who rely on tips have watched their real income shrink as tourists cut back and inflation eats away at every dollar. Union agreements haven't caught up, and the economic aftershocks of the pandemic still linger. Housing costs have only made things worse. Rent in Las Vegas has climbed more than 45% since 2019. Gas prices remain high, healthcare premiums keep rising, and nothing seems to stabilize. A household earning $80,000 with two incomes might appear secure, but after taxes, rent, car payments, and insurance, many are left with barely $400 a month for food. That doesn't go far when ground beef alone costs $7 a pound. The result is a hidden hunger crisis unfolding inside a state built on luxury. Food banks across Nevada report a 50% increase in working-class families seeking help since 2022. These aren't people without jobs. They're retail workers, casino staff, and small business owners trying to hold on. 1 in 3 middle-class Nevadans now admits to skipping meals regularly to save money. Many rely on credit cards to buy groceries, stacking high-interest debt just to keep their refrigerators stocked. It's not unusual to see grocery store parking lots full of expensive cars owned by people drowning financially. The appearance of prosperity is the last thing holding together. The damage goes deeper than finances. There's a quiet psychological toll in struggling to afford food while living in a place built on excess. Families hide their hardship, acting like everything's fine as they stretch meals one more day. Parents quietly take smaller portions so their kids don't notice. Seniors pass on fresh produce because spending $2 on an apple feels indulgent. This same quiet despair haunted America nearly a century ago. The difference now is that it arrives wrapped in LED lights, smartphone apps, and 24-hour delivery services. Nevada's economy may look vibrant, but many of its people are hungry in silence. Inflation has erased raises. Rent hikes have wiped out stability. And the illusion of success has trapped millions in survival mode. The waitresses, technicians, dealers, and service workers who built this state aren't standing in breadlines. They're standing in grocery aisles, holding their breath as the total climbs past what they can afford. Behind every dazzling Las Vegas marquee is a household eating less, saving nothing, and slowly losing hope. The Great Depression isn't just history here. It's creeping back beneath the neon glow, one empty dinner plate at a time. Number 2. Texas. Texas once stood as a promise, a place where hard work paid off, homes were affordable, jobs were plentiful, and weekends meant family barbecues instead of financial stress. But by 2025, that promise has soured. The very middle-class families who built Texas, from oil fields to tech corridors, are now struggling to afford the most basic necessity of all: food. The pride that once defined the Lone Star State is quietly giving way to anxiety. Grocery bills are climbing at a pace that feels impossible to outrun. And in a state that fuels the nation with cattle, crops, and energy, working households are finding it harder each month to feed themselves. Just a few years ago, in 2019, the average Texas family spent roughly $680 a month on groceries. Today, that same bill has climbed past $1,150. What once felt like mild inflation has turned into a financial gut punch. Eggs now sell for close to $4.90 a dozen. Milk is approaching $6 a gallon. Chicken, which used to cost about $2.20 a pound, now runs $5.50 or more. Even basics like rice and bread, foods people rely on in tough times, keep inching upward. Families that once filled shopping carts without hesitation now move slowly through the aisles, watching totals rise. They buy less meat, skip snacks, and replace fresh produce with canned alternatives that last longer. Texas used to feed the country. Now it's fueling a growing crisis at home. The irony is hard to ignore. Texas leads the nation in agriculture and energy production, yet its middle class is being crushed by corporate profit margins and unchecked inflation. A median household income of $73,000 sounds respectable, but once taxes are taken out and $2,000 rent, $500 utilities, insurance, healthcare, and fuel are paid, there's almost nothing left. In cities like Houston and Dallas, families of 4 report spending nearly one-third of their income just to stay fed. A father in San Antonio put it bluntly, "We don't buy anything extra anymore. No snacks, no takeout, just the basics, and even that doesn't stretch far enough." Food banks across the state are buckling under the pressure. The Houston Food Bank, one of the largest in the country, reports a 45% increase in demand from working families since 2022. These aren't people without jobs. They're nurses, teachers, factory employees, and delivery drivers. Many arriving still in uniform, embarrassed but desperate. Grocery chains are seeing a troubling pattern. Fewer items per cart, but higher totals at checkout. People are paying more and walking away with less. And children are feeling the impact too. School lunch debt across Texas has surpassed $100 million statewide, with teachers quietly covering meals out of their own pockets so students don't go hungry. This isn't just an economic breakdown, it's a moral one. Texas has always championed independence and opportunity. But what does freedom mean when a paycheck can't cover food for your family? When buying milk competes with filling the gas tank, and neither feels affordable? Today's Texas middle class isn't thriving, it's surviving, one receipt at a time. Credit card balances tied to grocery purchases keep rising, and household debt has reached record levels. Behind every "God Bless Texas" bumper sticker is a family cutting dinner portions and hoping prices don't climb again next week. The tragedy doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in half-filled carts, thinner grocery bags, and parents claiming they're not hungry so their children can eat a little more. The Great Depression once meant breadlines captured in black and white photos. Now it comes disguised as digital payments, overdraft fees, and maxed-out cards. Texas was once the symbol of the American dream. Today, it's standing at the edge of its unraveling. The grills have gone cold, refrigerators sit emptier, and the middle class is relearning a hard truth their grandparents already knew. Hunger doesn't care how big your house is when the pantry is bare. Number 1. California. California was once the ultimate promise. Golden coastlines, year-round sunshine, booming industries, and the belief that hard work guaranteed a good life. For generations, it symbolized the future. But by 2025, that promise has fractured. Behind the palm trees and luxury electric cars, millions of middle-class Californians are living one grocery run away from financial disaster. This is the state that feeds much of the country through its farms, vineyards, and distribution networks. Yet teachers, nurses, and even tech workers are struggling to afford food for their own tables. This isn't hyperbole. It's a quiet, unsettling reality unfolding aisle by aisle. The numbers tell the story clearly. In 2019, the average California household spent about $750 per month on groceries. Today, that same expense ranges from $1,400 to $1,600 depending on location. In San Francisco, a single gallon of milk pushes $7. Eggs can cost $6.50 a dozen. Chicken that once sold for under $3 a pound now sits close to $7. A grocery bag that used to total $60 now rings up at more than $120. A quick stop for bread, milk, eggs, and produce can exceed $80, forcing families to put items back before reaching the register. Meanwhile, the state's median household income, roughly $91,500, barely keeps pace with reality. When rent absorbs $3,000 a month and taxes claim much of what remains, the math stops working. California's middle class hasn't disappeared. It's been quietly reclassified as the working poor. These aren't people relying on assistance. They're professionals. Teachers in Los Angeles, engineers in San Jose, nurses in Sacramento, people skipping meals so they can cover rent. Surveys now show nearly 40% of middle-income Californians experiencing food insecurity, levels once associated only with the state's poorest communities. In Los Angeles County alone, more than 2 million residents rely on food banks every month, many of them employed full-time. Inflation has turned dignity into debt and debt into hunger. Even within what would rank as the world's fifth-largest economy, food has become a luxury. The cruel contradiction is impossible to ignore. California grows much of America's food: strawberries, almonds, avocados, lettuce. Yet the people harvesting, packaging, transporting, and even managing the technology behind those systems often can't afford the products themselves. Locally grown grapes cost more in San Jose than they do in Chicago. An avocado grown miles away can sell for $2.50.
Farmers struggle under rising costs while major grocery corporations post record profits. This isn't a lack of food, it's a failure of fairness. The new middle class survives on constant calculation. Parents trade fresh produce for canned alternatives. Milk is rationed. Meat becomes a rare purchase. Cheap processed foods replace balanced meals simply to avoid hunger. Healthy eating has shifted from a basic expectation to a privilege reserved for the wealthy. One mother in Oakland explained it plainly. "I used to shop for what we enjoyed. Now I shop for what keeps us alive." The data backs her up. Food prices in California have risen 26% since 2021, nearly 3 times faster than income growth. The result is millions of people living with quiet hunger while billion-dollar grocery chains continue to thrive. This crisis isn't only physical, it's psychological. People who once felt secure now live with constant anxiety. They track prices daily, plan meals around discounts, and hope nothing goes wrong. A flat tire or medical bill could mean skipping groceries for the week. The emotional toll is heavy. Pride replaced with guilt, stability replaced with fear. For many Californians, the American dream now means getting through another month without maxing out a credit card.